Hey, this is Pablo Hidalgo from Lucasfilm, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z, or Zed for Canadian and British listeners. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Senator, what a pleasure to see you.
You as well, Luthen. Sorry to be so late. It's always right when you're leaving, everyone remembers all the things they meant to bother you with.
Free your mind, Senator. This is a place where time stands still.
Tika, if you're going to steal my parts and then sell them back to me, could you at least clean them first, as a courtesy?
I am told you will be presented with Master Cattry's council seats.
I will.
Is this something you knew was happening before we left for Raxos?
Always remember, your focus determines your reality.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee are the authors of Dawn of Rebellion, the visual guide. I have a returning guest and a brand new guest to Coffee with Kenobi, but fortunately I've had the good pleasure of chatting with both of them several times over the years. First, returning guest, Pablo Hidalgo. Pablo, welcome back to the show, bud.
Hey, thanks for having me, or thanks for keeping to have me, despite, past precedent.
Exactly. Yeah, we were joking about how he gets an oven mitt. I didn't tell him he has to pay for postage, but we'll get to that another time. Our second guest. This is the first time Emily has been on the show, but it's Shkoukani, right? Did I pronounce it right?
It's Shkoukani.
Shkoukani. I'm sorry. With the last name like Zehr, you understand how it is. So thank you both so much for being here. This book is fascinating to me. Of course, DK visual guides are a must. I had the good fortune of writing one with Pablo a couple of years ago, but this one's different. For the both of you, though, what makes the visual guide Dawn of Rebellion stand out more from previous resource books? I know Obi-Wan, Kenobi, and Andor are in it, but there's got to be more to it than that.
I suppose I could dive on this one. I mean, the thing that made it fundamentally different, it was DK's approach to it. And really, I credit their editorial team with this because it kind of came to us wrapped with a nice bow as this thing, which was rather than wait for a series to end in order to do a complete examination of it, they found a way to talk about things like Bad Batch and Andor, especially, which are still in progress, without having to wait years for the series to conclude. So they decided to slice it up as, we're going to do a book about the era. So you could basically cover more things as opposed to cover one topic at a level of detail that it may not be ready to be covered yet. So you're able to get enough detail in there, but it's got a broader scope than some of the books in the past.
Excellent. Emily, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that on top of everything that Pablo already mentioned, it felt like we really got the chance to tell a story beyond the stories of just what we were retelling and diving into. It's really the Dawn of Rebellion that's happening, and I think that we have to sell that in this in this book.
Yes, and it's like all things DK, the book is so beautifully laid out and carefully crafted. It's amazing. What also is amazing to me, this is my favorite era of Star Wars, but I'm curious for the both of you, and Emily, we'll start with you on this. What makes this period in Star Wars so rich for further exploration?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of things going for it. I think, it's set in this interesting time between episodes 3 and 4, and specifically between two very big moments on the timeline. Big impactful events happen at both ends of this time period, and I guess I'll quote Solo's opening, which says it's a lawless time, and that's the whole thing. It's a lawless time, and but there is also this growing empire that's trying to create order, and that's just creating so much tension. And obviously, tension is so rich for storytelling.
It's an absolute must. Pablo, for you, it always is funny to ask you certain things, because I'm sure that you've been asked some of these things 10,000 times, whether it's unsolicited or not. But what is it about it for you? You've been exploring it since the beginning.
It's interesting because this era has always been kind of, for a long time, it's been roped off just because we didn't know necessarily where the story was going to go. And even now, with new storytelling taking place, it's like there's still enough, it's 19 years or so. There's still enough corners that haven't been explored, so that it still feels new and exciting. But at the same time, it's got all the elements. Are you hearing my dog? Are you hearing my dog in the background?
Yeah.
Your
dog's first appearance.
Yeah, my dog has clearly thoughts about the topic, and I'll let her talk once I'm done. But what I was going to say is, it has all the familiar elements for like two generations of Star Wars fans. It has the original trilogy fans are able to pull from the toy box that we're familiar with, as far as the Empire and the seeds of rebellion, and a lot of the shapes and forms that appeal to us. But it also has a big shadow of the prequels in it as well. So being able to pull from both ends of that timeline is pretty exciting, and just seeing the way things interact and evolve between the two, it's pretty exciting just to experience that.
I agree. There's a richness that very much comes to life in Dawn of Rebellion. Now, this is my day job, of course, as a mythology and writing teacher. It's hard not to look at something like this. I mean, myth is just a Greek word for story, as we know, but there are mythological influences that jump out to me, whether consciously or not. But what mythological influences have either of you noticed while writing and researching for this book? Emily, we'll start with you.
Oh, I don't think that, honestly, for me, I only wrote like a chapter of the book, so I only really got to dive into Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I think that it's best to kind of like let the filmmakers and the people that kind of created those shows define what their influences were. It wasn't really necessarily my influences, and so yeah, I don't know if I can really speak to them. I don't know, Pablo, if you feel more confident.
It's interesting because obviously all these storytellers are strongly influenced by things when they create it, but I don't want to steal that veneer of what it may or may not be and stumble into speculation and take away people's theories. Except in one case, which I will cite, just because I know my involvement in it, and I could say, "Oh, that's where this comes from," and that came from Kenobi, when Deb Chow and Joby Harold were developing the story. They knew that they wanted this really seedy looking urban planet, and it remained unnamed for the longest time in development. They had like placeholder names for a while, and so I created a short list of potential planet names for this, and I reached into mythology, knowing Deb's interest and some of the filmmaking she was influenced by. So the name Dayu is actually, its root is from one of the Chinese concepts of hell. So if you notice that and its mythological roots, that is one where I could say, yes, there is some actual evidence to support that, because that's where it came from. But anything beyond that, again, I want that to remain the realm of speculation, unless folks like Tony Gilroy or Deb Chow or Jen Corbett or the showrunners of the shows that are covered come out swinging, saying where their roots are.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, I hate speculation personally. To me, it's speculation without regulation equals fan constipation. So I try to stay quite far away from that kind of stuff myself. I like that reference. That's very, very cool. There's a lot of great things, that will be there for people to enjoy. The art, of course, what has been written about these characters, different ways to think about them. But one part that greatly enhances this is John R. I believe his last name was Milani. I'd love to hear both of you talk about the cross-section artwork, especially when you first got a chance to see it.
Oh man, I'm going to throw a little bit of this. I'll talk into detail about the specific art, but Emily, I know that these types of books mean a lot to you, so I wouldn't mind you taking a pass at what that means to you.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, when I was growing up, I think these types of images were the first things that caught my attention. They're so detailed, they're so intricate, and there's just it really just starts stimulating your imagination when you start seeing this. You start thinking, okay, how does all this work and fit together, and how does it look? And like that's what I'm seeing when I watch, in this case, Andor. And the data points. Those were the first things that I read when I got those books growing up too, because they were the shortest little things that I could pick out of the book, and I could instantly learn something, and it was so exciting. And I didn't really necessarily care if I was learning about a sensor array or something more significant. And yeah, I don't know. They definitely get me excited, apparently.
Plus, you are an artist in your own right too.
To a degree, I guess.
Right. So that it just go ahead. Pablo.
Yeah. For me, it's like these are the sections of the books of the DK books that I spent like a lot of hours just looking at. It's like the artists that we've had over the years have been amazing at being able to extrapolate just exactly what is underneath the hood of these vehicles. So that tradition got to continue in this one, and the editors put on their short list of like what we would like to see, and sure enough, it progressed to the point where Luthen's ship made the cut. Like that's the one we're gonna dissect, and we're fortunate in that I've got a good relationship with the art department of Andor. So I handled the Andor spreads, and I was able to contact like Luke Hull and who's the art director on Andor, and Moen Leo and TJ Falls from ILM, who are the VFX supervisors on it. And I said, hey, we're going to do this. If there's any insight you could give me, please let me know. And I poured over the blueprints that they built for the physical set, as well as concept art, which showed what how Luthen's Fondor Hauler changed over the years. The biggest, and this is my favorite part, because like often there's a cheat, like that's the reality of translating film to sort of like narrative canon. It's like it's famous that the Millennium Falcon interior does not actually fit inside the Millennium Falcon, but those artists figure it out. So with Luthen's ship, the as originally planned, the entry ramp switched sides, so that the interior of the ship actually makes it look like you're heading to one side of the ship in order to leave it, and in reality you leave it off the other side. So we had to concoct a curving corridor that doesn't actually exist in the ship in order to accommodate the side that you enter and the side and compared to the rest of the ship. So that's just a little cheap, but overall it's pretty authentic, and as far as how it could legitimately function, and how the ship that you see on screen could like legitimately exist in space. And all inspired by a lot of blueprint art and development art in the making of the show.
Well, when we first saw in season 2 of Mandalorian, when Boba Fett's ship, we finally got to see it take off and how it rotated. Mm-hmm. Speaking of physics being hard to comprehend, even in the real world, I thought that was kind of mind blowing. So things like this are just good fodder for fans to just sort of enjoy and pour over.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of my favorite things, and I love Luthen's ship. So being able to dive into it was an absolute treat.
Oh, absolutely, and it's a great section. Another section I really enjoyed, pages 8 to 19, cover the Imperial military. Talk about the information on this page and what it reveals. I think you could spend hours just on this little spread itself.
This is tricky. It's always a tricky situation, because in the past, source books have always, some of our favorite source books were written at a time when Star Wars was pretty sedate, if not considered dead. Like the Imperial source book came out in 1989, and I think those authors felt pretty confident that they could establish big, sweeping declarations of what the Imperial military is and isn't, because they didn't have to accommodate for the idea that there'd be future storytelling that would take place in this era, right? So now we're in this time, in this reality, where we're blessed to have lots of Star Wars storytelling told at this time. And so you have to kind of walk this tightrope of being able to give you substantial information, but not close off any loops, so that other storytellers can make up new things. A long way of saying is in Andor, we saw security troopers wearing gear that we've never seen them before. Like we saw what we'd ordinarily seen as black uniformed troopers now, holding riot shields and being involved in putting down an uprising on Ferrix. And it's like, that's interesting. Like ordinarily the definition of that type of trooper wouldn't have that. You would have probably thrown that to stormtroopers and whatnot. But because of the needs of the show, they put those troopers into that sort of action. And so that's the kind of push and pull that we always have to deal with, these authoritative guides, because even though, as you want to call them, definitive, they're definitive in terms of what pieces they choose to show you, but there's always new Imperial forces and new pieces that we haven't seen before. And I could say with confidence, without spoiling things, future seasons of Bad Batch and Andor are going to add to the roster of the Imperial military, so that there's always new things to discover.
Fun, absolutely fun. Emily, are you more Team Imperial or Team Rebellion?
Ooh, this is a great question. Generally, like I look like I would probably be aesthetically Imperial because I just literally wear all black all the time, and I literally just shaved my head. So right now it's like not looking good for me. But no, I at heart definitely a rebel through and through.
Perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
I would have it no other way.
I think when I was reading this page, I was like, it's like a little Imperial pamphlet propaganda for the Empire we got going on right here.
I was almost surprised to find Imperial stuff in the book, to be honest.
Well, it's like, as much as Dawn of Rebellion puts rebellion front and center, it's like you gotta show the opponents. You gotta show what we're up against.
You got to rebel against something, otherwise, what's maybe you need a new title. Exactly. Are there certain ancillary characters that you really enjoyed being able to cover in the book?
Ooh, I didn't cover this character, but I guess my favorite ancillary character though was General Draven from Rogue One, and I think that he kind of shows something that Rogue One in general obviously shows us a lot, especially when it came out. I just remember it was so kind of not revolutionary, but it really did. It was a different perspective on Star Wars and on the characters and the organizations within Star Wars. And I think General Draven kind of like was a key component of that. He kind of made, as Pablo wrote, hard decisions, and I think that he kind of highlights, the sort of I don't know, those fractions, I guess, that we're seeing, in within the rebellion, I guess.
Sure. Pablo, I know you were a big Cantina guy. I don't know that there's a lot of Cantina stuff.
There's B2EMO, the Andor family dog droid. I have such a huge soft spot for that droid because I think he really stole the show. So I wish I could have written more about him, but I hope I filled the space allocated for him accordingly. I'm also a huge sucker for Saw Gerrera because, as far as a character that has fulfilled his potential, he absolutely did that, and yet he continues to grow. Like Saw, I don't know if you know this, but I don't know if your listeners know this, but Saw has this huge real world history as far as where he came from. Like George originated him for his much legendary live action series that never came about. That was what Saw was created for. And when that didn't come about, he kind of backfilled him and told his backstory in Clone Wars, and then Rogue One took him and ran with him. And he's such an intriguing and interesting character that he's managed to show up many times without wearing out his welcome, I think, because I find him fascinating. The actors that have played him, particularly Forrest Whitaker, has really instilled him with a lot of just compelling character. And I'm glad that he got a 2-page spread in this, because he got a 2-page spread in the Rogue One Ultimate Visual Guide, and we found out so much more about him since then that I'm always happy to revisit him and find more about him.
He's a legitimate one. I feel like you could pop out of Star Wars and put him into a Shakespeare play and he'd fit in perfectly.
I think he's a character that political scientists and historians could write about in a really intriguing way.
Absolutely. The one of the things I tell my students is that there are two really good ways to learn about something. You write about it or you teach it. So while you're sort of doing both, and you're writing a book like this because you're teaching sort of fans and consumers of pop culture about these characters, but you're writing about them too. You've obviously both working for Lucasfilm, talk and write about these characters a lot. But are there any events or characters that you wrote about just through this book specifically that helped you to either appreciate or understand them in a new or refreshing way?
Yeah, I can start. I got to write for Leia, and I have always had an appreciation for Leia, but I think that for me, when I was coming into Star Wars, I was actually more focused on Padme because just of when I was growing up, so she was sort of my hero and my inspiration and stuff. And I felt very connected to because I was like at that age where I was like, I could be a 12-year-old queen too, something like that. Or, but yeah, I think that writing for Leia was fun because I got to write about her in a different period than we generally see her, but it just it gave me a better appreciation of like her foundation and like where she came from. And Obi-Wan Kenobi really solidifies, she is a product of a lot of things, but she is her own person too. And I think that's like the greatest lesson that I learned out of that show and in diving back into it for this book.
That's very cool.
And for me, there's a lot of ways you could slice this, but one that keeps popping up to mind is the Syndulla family, which I did a spread on because I covered a bit of the Ryloth resistance in this book. And the appreciation that I gained from this is that just by the nature of Star Wars storytelling, we never tell a story chronologically. Why would you do something like that? It's the easiest trick in the book. So of course we slice this up, and you meet these characters at different points of their lives, and then you understand what their backstories are. And so with Hera and her father, it was interesting to finally, I hadn't done the exercise of putting the narrative into chronological order, starting with, Cham Syndulla and Clone Wars and working your way through Bad Batch and then getting to where we see them in Rebels. And then at the time we were doing this, I knew that she would be surfacing in Ahsoka. So I kind of really admired the way that character has remained consistent, yet still has an interesting evolution and descendants from Cham Syndulla, and just putting together that spread made me really appreciate that they've really become a central family to a particular aspect of Star Wars storytelling.
Definitely. Of course, Hera's helped. I think Hera is the anchor on all of that as far as like from a fan perspective. But there's another aspect of Star Wars that came out of Rebels where I really can like. And that was the Inquisitor program. The Inquisitorius page was particularly helpful for me as far as identifying, keeping track of who is who and what they look like and all that good stuff. Nice to have it in one beautiful book. Talk about the program of the Inquisitorius and what do we learn about this program through your book?
Yeah, I got to write this spread. It was super fun. I also find the Inquisitorius super fascinating and rich and for storytelling and whatnot. But yeah, I think in terms of what the book kind of tells us, each Inquisitor kind of has like this. It kind of creates this story of chaos, obviously, within the Inquisitorius. Every one of them is sort of is troubled, has fallen to the dark side, has is struggling in some way, is vying for power in some way, is competing for something, and it just really creates that bigger picture of like it's very chaotic within this organization, but also it's like kind of very sad to watch because it's also a little like they can't see past the organization. And that's Palpatine's dream, is for them to never see past it. So he's doing it. So
yeah, I really got to give Emily credit because I should say, the Inquisitorius is one of this thing. It's this evolving topic, and we're not done diving into that particular well. And whenever it comes up, it falls to Emily to give us what's the latest. What have we said? What have we discovered? And Emily is so good at producing these sort of one sheets and these graphical representations of like, okay, what Inquisitors do we know are on the table, and what became of them, and what do we think their progression is? And that's been super helpful when working on projects like the novel that came up that Delilah wrote, and the Jedi Fallen Order games, and all those things like that has to kind of live on this continuity of the Inquisitorius. At the same time, kind of the challenge that I keep talking about, it's like you have to expose enough that it feels like you're getting information, but hold back enough that we could add more for future storytelling.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we love this franchise so much, is because there's so much richness on this massive chessboard, and there's so many things that you can do and enjoy. There's so much more to sort of dive into with it. I mean, you could metaphorically go into all kinds of places with it, but there's a richness to character, and that is what propels story as much as anything. So these next couple of questions I have, I was talking with DK about these, and like, look, the rest of these questions are just me selfishly wanting to pick brains of these two masters that I'm fortunate to talk with here today on the show. But I want to go back to Star Wars Rebels. Let's talk about the Blade Wing, shall we? Why wasn't the Blade Wing put into mass production, or is the B Wing that we see in Return of the Jedi, is that the Blade Wing? I don't feel like it is, but you would know better than I. And I only ask because the weaponry on the Blade Wing seems to be pretty good.
Yeah, there's two ways to answer this, and there's the real world production reality, and then there's the in-universe continuity canon reality. And the real world reality is, this is the way I see it, is like our understanding of how powerful the B-Wing only really, like its weapons loadout only came about in like the 1987 source book and then the 1990s X-Wing video game. And that's what gave you to appreciate, because it just doesn't appear on screen in any like meaningful way. And other than that, we have maybe the Kenner toy to judge its effectiveness.
Yes.
So like those are the books. Those are the sources that told us this is how powerful it was, right? That based on the definition of everything that we had seen in the extant 3 movies, Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi, this is its weapons that it had. Makes perfect sense. Understand it. By the time we got to Rebels and we wanted to show a B-Wing in action on that show, the definition of what a powerful ship looks like and what that could be cinematically has kind of evolved, because we've had the prequels that came out since then. So I was not at all surprised to see that the artists on Rebels pick from the Republic gunship weaponry to give you something really impactful and amazing to look at. It's like, wow, look at that. Like that was never on the table as a potential weapons loadout when we were first introduced to the B-Wing in 1983, or when it was expanded in 87, or in the X-Wing games in the 90s. So the goal of Rebels was to give you a wow moment. And that wow moment was best delivered by giving you a weapon system that you had never seen on a B-Wing before. Great. That meets the needs of the show. Then it falls to us to figure out, well, why does that B-Wing do that thing and none of the other B-Wings that we've had over 20, 30 years of history do that? And the folks who did the Haynes guide of Rebel Starfighters that came out a few years ago were the first to tackle that question. And they basically said that the types of weapons that the B-Wing prototype had put the ship at risk of burning out its hyperdrive, or it was like financially unfeasible or something like that to create at scale. And it's funny because like when you come to Star Wars fans, I think Star Wars fans, especially collectors, can appreciate the difference between a prototype of a toy and what actually makes it to retail. The folks at Hasbro or Kenner do the budgeting and realize, oh, we can't make thousands of these. That would be too expensive, or hundreds of these, or however they make. So I think that's the reality that underpins the difference between Quarry's B-Wing prototype, the Blade Wing, and what we see in the finished line model of the B-Wing.
Emily, are you glad that I asked Pablo this one first?
No follow-ups. Great. 10 out of 10, Pablo.
Good job. Be sure to follow Pablo, like and subscribe to his channel. Yeah. You can be sure that whether it's a prototype or the regular thing, Steve Sansweet will have both of them. That's what I'm counting on.
You also have the bootleg one, which is great. So I'm sure there's bootleg B-wings out there that do things that we can't even imagine.
With his face spray painted on the side, of course. So another thing, just sort of a selfish question on my part. I always hear people talking about the flaws of the Jedi in the prequel era, and people are very judgy about it. And it always kind of drives me crazy. Palpatine clearly is the architect of this whole thing, but is it fair to fault the Jedi for what would lead to the need for a rebellion?
This is, I know the conversation that you're talking about.
Yes,
It's definitely a big topic for sure. I don't know. From my perspective, I don't think it. From my perspective, yeah, I don't think that they're necessarily at fault for the need of a rebellion, but I do blame them for their own downfall. They knew about many like dark machinations that they chose to ignore or keep quiet about, or just not take the right action towards, including regarding the clone army. As confusing as that all is, they figured it out, and they still, and that obviously directly leads to their own downfall. So I think in terms of their own order, yes, but not in relation to the rebellion from how I see it.
Yeah, it's a long point of debate, and I don't think there's any one solid answer to this because you could debate either side. But like, I always and I should couch this for both Emily and on my behalf. This is all just our opinions. It's not like some sort of Lucasfilm mandate. I think ultimately, the tension that people are feeling is the difference between the qualities of individual Jedi and then the flaws of the institution and the order itself, right? And what I like to say sometimes, like, there's a tension between Jedi and order, Jedi and order. Like, individual Jedi are great at doing what they do, but then the systematized institution of the Jedi Order creates all these kind of blind spots. And the biggest fault is honestly having faith in the Republic and that the system works. And that's a real shame to say, but I think that there's a truth to it. And honestly, it inspired some of our High Republic storytelling that we've done in the past few years because we wanted to show a functional Republic and why they would have such faith that the system works, because there was a time where it was worth defending it. Like, there were good people that had everyone's best interest at heart. And that's not where the galaxy is by the time we get into episode 1.
True. The one time I got to sit and chat with Kathleen Kennedy, I thanked her for the ambiguity that continues to sort of perpetuate in Star Wars. And I think that's so much better. Like, why, if you want answers are, in a math book, right? That's where, but this is a fun story. At the heart of it, this is a fun, engaging, exciting mythology. And the conversation, the rhetoric that comes through it, that's the good stuff, right? Just enjoy the books and the films and everything on Disney Plus and anything Star Wars you can get your hands on, and just enjoy it for what it is. And I appreciate so much the two of you continue to lovingly pour your time and talents into this franchise. It is not go unappreciated. So thank you both so much for that.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So collaboratively, Emily, I've worked with this guy before. I know what a diva he can be. Just kidding, of course. How does it feel for you to look on the spine of this book and see your name next to Pablo's?
It's pretty exciting. It's funny too. At the same time, Pablo and I work together 5 days out of the week, so I get to see Pablo and work with him a majority of my time, and I get to collaborate with him. And in this instance, we got to collaborate on writing, which was fun, and we got to dive into a book together. And we kind of, like you established at the beginning of this, kind of a different type of visual guide too. Mm-hmm. And I think that was super fun. And yeah, like I said, Pablo and I get to work together all the time, and so I'm always learning from him. And yeah, I think I want to share that Pablo said that his favorite ancillary character was B2 EMO, and when we were putting together, our spreads for this book, there was a day where there is a B2 EMO in our halls, and Pablo had gone over and measured it for the book, and I was like, that's awesome. I love that.
That's outstanding. Pablo, I got to ask you, what is it like to have a book where you get to be with Emily?
Oh, I think it's great. I mean, honestly, the way it came about, and I hope you don't mind me telling the story, Emily, is like, in the period where there wasn't a guide in the works, but we had just come off, Obi-Wan Kenobi basically becoming public. Emily is a huge prequel fan, and they came up to me and said, because I have this established relationship with DK, and Emily said, if there's ever an Obi-Wan visual guide, could you put my name in the running for whoever gets to write it? I'm like, yeah, no, that would be great. I know that that series and those characters and that era means so much to you. And sure, but what ended up happening is there wasn't an Obi-Wan Kenobi visual guide, but so it's like, okay, I thought that was all said and done. And then DK came up to me and said, do you want to do the Dawn of Rebellion? And I looked at what the proposal was, and Obi-Wan Kenobi was in there, and I'm like, I'll do it, but is there any possibility of carving out the Obi-Wan chapter so Emily could do it? And Emily, are you interested in it? And Emily said yes, and DK said yes. So it's like, yeah, good, let's do this. And it honestly, I mean, like it always helps to spread the love, because it's a lot of work to do. So I was happy to give up those spreads if it meant that someone who had the energy and the passion to devote to it was willing to take it on. And I was quite happy that the way it all turned out.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is... yes.
Outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. Well, it's an absolute pleasure, of course, as always, to talk to the both of you. Normally, this is the part of the show where I ask people to share where they can be found on social media. I will just let everybody know Pablo can be found. Just write something on a piece of paper, roll it up, and then put it in a bottle and put it in the sea. And Pablo might get a chance to enjoy your musings about Star Wars. Is that fair, Pablo?
That, and with the tallest mountain within walking distance, I will be at the top of that. You have to walk past the tree line and where the mists kind of start to part, and I'll be sitting there on the side of a path, ready to answer your questions. I love it.
And please make sure to use the correct password, which changes daily. Emily, what about you?
Oh, you can. I'm a typical millennial, so you can find me online. But I am on X or Twitter at SHKOUKS, and that's at Shkooks.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.